Good evening. I'm Pittsburgh City Councilman Daniel Lavelle,
And I'm Councilman Reverend Ricky Burgess.
and we welcome you again to Black Pittsburgh Matters. Black Pittsburgh Matters is a series of virtual town hall meetings affirming a citywide agenda that Black Pittsburgh does indeed matter. Black Pittsburgh Matters means that Black lives matter. We must protect the health and safety of Black people. It means that communities matter. We must focus on rebuilding Black communities. And it means that Black wealth matters. We must focus on increasing Black employment and entrepreneurship opportunities.
The Black community has been disproportionately affected by concurrent crises, the COVID-19 pandemic and its resulting economic crisis, and race relations, which are both public health crises. Normally, in times of crisis and great change, we'll be coming to you as the Black elected officials of Pittsburgh and having meetings across the city with our constituents, partners, and allies. Since we cannot do so safely in the current pandemic, we're now using this media and platform to come to you in the ways in which we can, to talk about what we're doing, and discuss policy and legislation concerning Black Pittsburgh. These meetings will be available via Facebook, YouTube, and the city's cable channel. You can contact or ask questions via the Black Pittsburgh Matters Facebook page or email us at blackpghmatters, that's blackpghmatters@gmail.com. Also, you can comment or ask questions through our live feed right now. Today, we are joined and so honored by Mayor Peduto and his staff to talk about what the city is doing to support Black Pittsburgh.
While Pittsburgh has been and has recently been declared one of the most livable cities, we know that Black Pittsburghers face a different reality. To amend the underlying justice issues, the mayor, Councilman Burgess, and I have partnered to deliver 18 policy pursuits to empower and uplift Black Pittsburgh, ranging from opportunities for youth, affordable housing, economic development, public safety, and much more.
And we are in a, Daniel, you and I think, are luckily or fortunately in a time of great seismic change in our country and here in our city. Certainly, last night, the verdict, the guilty verdict of Officer Chaffin in the murder of George Floyd has brought a new level of consciousness to our country. And I think there are two things, and I think they're connected, at least in my mind. And first of all, my prayers are not just with, George's family, George Floyd's family, but also with the officer's family. Real justice will be the days when neither an officer or a Black young man, lose their lives in their career and both can return to their families. But one of the things I think as we begin to look forward into the future is not only must we reimagine police and reimagine public safety, but we must invest in Black people in Black communities. And as I said earlier today on council, to me, those two things must be done simultaneously. It's not an either or, but it's a both and.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I, as probably the world, sat and watched and waited to listen what the verdict was going to be. I sort of had two sort of immediate feelings. One was relief that 12 jurors actually finally did the right thing, right? They didn't do anything special. They did what was right and what was just. And then I had a quick sense of sadness that pervades for a while, in part because I was relieved that people actually did what was right. Because for so long, police have abused Black bodies. For so long, this country has abused Black bodies. And when we've called for justice, there has been none. And so finally, there was some. But it's sad that people were celebrating finally having something done correct and just for Black people. And the other reason I was quickly saddened was because I was on a group text, and one of old college roommates who lives in Columbus, as we're all saying, "Did you see the verdict?" His response was no, but a young Black girl was just shot in the chest in Columbus by a white police officer. And so minutes, and I don't know the details of that story. I know she was supposed to be holding a knife of some sorts. But again, another, I would argue, probably unnecessarily shooting involving police and Black bodies. But with all that being said, I do have hope because we do have a city and a mayor who has been working with us for many, many years, even prior to this sort of upheaval. And I'll let him talk about it. But we've actually been doing and making a lot of good progress here in our city, both on public safety, but to your point, as well as actually investing in our neighborhoods so it doesn't come down to public safety, but rather we're investing in people on the front end.
This evening, we want to talk more about the legislation and programs that we've worked as partners to institute in Black Pittsburgh and to open a dialogue on what we've done so far, what's in progress, and what's on the horizon. We are honored to be joined by Mayor William Peduto, Assistant Chief of Staff Lindsay Powell, and Chief Equity Officer and Deputy Chief of Staff Majestic Lane. Welcome to this evening's town hall meeting.
Thank you, Councilman, and thanks for giving us the opportunity to share in some of the work that we've been doing and really the dialogue that has been created. They say that in Chinese, the word opportunity is associated to the word crisis. And I think that what we're seeing in this country right now is that reality, that the crisis that has come not only through the pandemic, but more importantly, through the Black Lives Matter movement and the identification and the reality of systemic racism, has given us this opportunity to find partners that we've never had before, to create policies that reverse decades of different types of policies that limited opportunity and allow us to create programs that give people more opportunity than they've had in the past. Together with the work of City Council, and I want to take a moment to say this, we have a majority of City Council members who not only understand, but understand the importance and difference between equity and equality. And equity meaning where there is more need, there should be more resources. Being able to have that type of a council allows us to be able to do great things. Now imagine an administration in Washington that is willing to invest in cities unlike anything we've seen since LBJ, and to be able to create the partnerships locally with our foundations, our corporations, and our nonprofits to begin rowing together in a way where the sum becomes much greater than the parts. That's where we're at today. And I look forward to having this conversation with you and Councilman Lavelle on the ways that we can continue to work together to bring all of Pittsburgh into finding solutions to not only lessening disparity, but more importantly, creating and expanding opportunity.
Thank you for that. One thing I would like you to do, however, because you started talking about where we are today, and I definitely want to talk about a number of initiatives that you have going on now. However, I think context matters, and this is not new work. Working on equity within our city is not new, even to the last 2 or 3 years. And I don't know the year you did it, but you were one of the first administrations to actually create an Office of Equity within your administration. And so what I would like you to do is just go back a few years to when you sort of became mayor and how you viewed equity, because I remember then you created, I forget what you called it, but you created a commission and you had people come together to talk about various issues that needed to be addressed within the city. And one of them was equity. And so it's not a new conversation, but if you could just share with us a little bit about your view on equity, how you came to sort of get engaged in it and why, and what you did early on in your administration to sort of build the foundation for a lot of what we're able to do now.
Yeah, so before I ever put my hand up and took that oath of office, we invited every Pittsburgher to be a part of the transition team. And over 1,000 people of the city of Pittsburgh took part. There were a series of public meetings that were broken down into committees after the first meeting, where people said, these are the areas that we want to see city government to get more involved in. There were issues about critical communities, meaning those struggling with addiction or homelessness, or those that are transferring from being formerly incarcerated and coming back into society. We had a lot of interest in education. And so from that, we created an administration that had a new bureau within the mayor's office. And it was called the Bureau of Neighborhood Empowerment. Valerie McDonald Roberts was brought on board to work on housing initiatives, small business entrepreneurship initiatives. And then we had Dr. Curtis Porter, who came in to work on workforce development and education. And between both of them, they put together a staff of basically mid-level managers that were responsible directly for those types of initiatives. During those first 4 years, that grew. Critical communities grew into our immigrant community, where we had nobody in city government who had been working in that before, which grew with the partnership of our foundations into Welcoming Pittsburgh. The education component grew through the involvement of city council to create early childhood education and to start looking at what the city could do, which grew into My Brother's Keeper, which grew into Rec to Tech, and so many other initiatives. And we realized that now we had this entire organization, and that leadership that Dr. Porter and Valerie McDonald Roberts brought to us could be coordinated together in one office of equity. And at that time, there were only 4 other cities in the United States that was looking at the concept of an office of equity. In our first year, we created an office of effectiveness and efficiency. The Department of Innovation and Performance was to look at the budget and to make sure that everything we did was as efficient and as effective as possible. Reward the departments that are doing well. Work to get the other ones up to speed. But we forgot the biggest E, equity. So we created its own department. And we asked the Deputy Chief of Staff, Majestic Lane, to take on the dual role of the Deputy Chief of Staff and the Chief of Equity. Much like we did in the first term with Kevin Acklin as a Chief of Staff and Economic Development, we felt that as the role of Deputy Chief of Staff, it brought immediate credibility to the idea. And I think I'd like to ask Majestic to talk a little bit about this, because not only did he create it in Pittsburgh, but he helped to create it throughout this United States, and to put together a group of chief equity officers at the very beginning that helped to create what equity in city government looks like.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Councilman, for having us on. I think the mayor laid it out. I think when the Bureau of Neighborhood Empowerment really was important and special, that we knew that we had neighborhood level issues and that we had a disconnect between some of the communities and the city hall. And it was really about how do we make sure that there's a bond between a connection and a relationship between what's happening in the community with all these issues that city government is starting to take on, that prior to the Peduto administration, the city wasn't taking on. But I think in the mayor's wisdom, he acknowledged that these were the issues of our time. As I often like to say, as we moved through that first 4 years, we realized that we just didn't have a place problem, but we had a race problem. And that we needed to actually engage not just in place as a proxy for Black people, or place as a proxy for the immigrant population, or place as a proxy, but actually acknowledge that these are the issues and conditions of our time. And at the time that we started to really develop the Office of Equity, it was still a new and unique idea across the country, obviously, with the racial reckoning, post George Floyd, and as well as a whole host of other things. You see many more offices. But at that time, we were the fifth place in the country to create an office, and actually the largest staff of any Office of Equity in the country. And I think that's really important to say that, because we know that equity doesn't happen in silos. It happens when people are connected. We also know that race is the largest indicator of lack of equity across the board. So that we know, and that specifically, that Black people suffer from equity issues at a higher clip, generally speaking, than everyone across the country. So what we were able to do was really take this idea of equity and root it in the idea that as long as there's a disparity based upon in a difference in the quality of life based upon race, that equity has not been reached. So we wanted to bring all the things we worked on together to then say, how do we bring this together and actually work with everybody's issues, acknowledging that Black people's issues, as we've seen so many times in this city, and as so many of us know, are palpable and affecting the quality of life, not just for Black people, but for the entire city. I think it's important for people to understand that Black people not doing well just doesn't impact Black people. It impacts who wants to come to the city. It impacts investment. It impacts so many other things, that the issue of equity as it pertains to Black people is the issue of the city of Pittsburgh. And so what we've been able to do is work together with a whole host of partners, and as well as all of council, but specifically, Councilman Lavelle and Councilman Burgess, on really focusing on what matters, what things do we need to make matter, what do we need to measure, and then once we measure it, what do we need to invest in and actually begin to make change? And I think there are a lot of great examples of that.
Lindsay, let me bring you in and ask you to, they've talked about it sort of on the high level. There are at least 18, maybe 20 different specific policies that Councilman Lavelle and I have partnered with the mayor to get done, from reimagining police to avenues of hope to own PGH, to the catapult program. And I guess of all the things, and you've kind of quietly been sort of the author of many of these programs and architect. What are some of the things that you're most interested in and proudest of that the city is doing, Lindsay?
Thank you so much, Councilman. I want to say that we have a fantastic team at the City of Pittsburgh within the policy shop, with folks that range from different portfolios, different areas of interest, that have been really at the helm with the mayor's at the helm of bringing the mayor's vision to light. There's so much to be excited about. I think that as Chief Lane, as Majestic was saying, really centering the idea that we need to ensure that through not just our programs and our practices, but our policies are all working towards making the city as livable as possible for Black people is so critical. And we've gotten to really, live that message through a lot of our programs and policies that the mayor has shepherded. In particular, something that I'm really passionate about is entrepreneurship. I think that for a long time, when it comes to workforce development and getting Black people to jobs that afford them family-sustaining wages, workforce development, I think, often looks at these issues through a deficit model or deficit-based thinking, where, well, this particular population doesn't have this, or, we need to train them this way. Entrepreneurship, particularly in the Black community, I think really kind of resembles that kind of rose in the concrete thinking, where Black people have been traditionally locked out of a lot of the vehicles and spaces that may have allowed a white resident to get to that middle class status or get those family sustaining wages, like unions, like kind of some of the traditional white collar jobs. With entrepreneurship, we have in Pittsburgh such a rich fabric of people either creating new businesses, trying to create new businesses, from clothes for dogs, from food to hair to you name it. It's just such a rich fabric of entrepreneurship. And again, moving away from that deficit-based thinking to asset-based thinking, how do we support those entrepreneurs? How do we make sure that we're mitigating those gaps so that if they wanted to move to a storefront, that they're able to do that? Catapult has been wildly successful here with the partnership of Circles, PGH, and the URA. We're able to allow those entrepreneurs to have that, prime storefront that they may not have been able to get on their own, but that prime storefront on Center Avenue and Penn Avenue, and hopefully on every major business corridor in the city, as we're working on with Avenues of Hope, that entrepreneur is able to be front and center on some of our busiest streets and able to get some of the soft skills that they need to be a better business owner, as well as some of the capital. We know that access to capital, is one of the biggest detriments for an entrepreneur trying to get, either grow their business or, get their name out there. And through our partnerships with the URA, providing microloans to these entrepreneurs that are very, safe and less risky than they would be in the kind of private market or at banks, has been a way that we've been able to support particularly Black women in these spaces. Aside from entrepreneurship, there's so much happening as well in the home ownership space. Councilman, you talked about Own PGH, which the URA is exploring how to get a housing bond to get more affordable housing from the Housing Opportunity Fund, which is our 10 million, as hopefully everyone knows, our 10 million. Everyone listening knows our $10 million, a year fund that we've been able to keep people in their homes, help people become first-time homeowners, and help people, homeowners stay in their homes by either doing some of those really costly repairs that they may not have been able to do out of pocket. To the land bank, the land bank has been something personally that I work on probably every day. And it's one of those things where if we're able to get first-time homeowners, particularly Black people, these opportunities, it's transformative. Councilman, both of you, I know that you've talked excessively about how can we get Black people into homes to build equity, to give generations to come, that either that home or that deed or, basically money in their pocket that they're able to take on to their next generation, either leverage for what have you. It's such a critical asset. And the land bank will make sure that these houses are affordable, that the community is able to reclaim them, and that it, again, holds high the idea of ensuring racial equity in this work. And so I could talk, as you can see, at length about these programs, but I think what's most important and ties them all together is that we're really ensuring that we're talking about Black people. Councilman, I know we've talked about this a lot, but rather than saying, we're talking about neighborhoods, we're talking about, disconnected communities. It's important to say that these programs, that these policies, that these practices want to help to provide Black people with the opportunities that we know haven't been afforded to them in the past. And so I think that that's the most important theme that runs through them, is that racial equity is at the forefront of each and every one of them.
The viewing public should be aware, Lindsay, that you sit on the board of the Land Bank, which is in part why you're so eloquent when you speak about it. You also sit on the board of the Urban Redevelopment Authority, which is again in part why you're so eloquent when you talk about supporting entrepreneurship in Black businesses, because you're on that board directing them to do so. So I think that should be made clear. But it also just needs stated that you're also on those boards because the mayor appointed you to them. And so that leads me to a question that I have for the mayor. Can you talk to us a little bit about one of the key ways of creating policies is allowing Black people to be at the table when we're making decisions. So can you talk to us a little bit about your approach to diversity and racial equity within your actual administration as it relates to people who directly work for you, as well as your appointments to boards and authorities?
It really comes down to one word: it's talent. So it is finding the people who have the best understanding. It's sort of, I often say it's like the Wizard of Oz, right? You want to have the people who have the brain. You want to have people who understand the issue, but they have to have compassion. They have to have the heart. And then they've got to have the courage. They got to have the gut in order to be able to stand up and to be able to make a difference. So when I look at the administration that I want to work with, I look at those three characteristics. And what you'll find is if you not limit yourself to the pond, but fish from the ocean, you're going to find a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds that have a lot of different ideas that help to complement a city as diverse as Pittsburgh. So we started out with the idea that this administration must reflect the diversity of the city. But then what we ended up finding out was that in these competitive positions where we're getting people applying from all over, that diversity has exceeded the diversity of Pittsburgh. 61% of all the people leading the city right now, city government, are women. Over 33% are a minority. And if you look at something like the Planning Commission, which historically has been white men, right now 8 of the 9 members are women. And I'm looking to field the 1972 pirates of planning commissions and having 9 out of 9 be on that commission to make up for the failures of the past. If you look at the URA, 60% of the membership are minority. And it's been that day since day one by design. Both of you I have entrusted with the key authorities of the city of Pittsburgh: economic development and housing. Daniel, in your work and heading the Affordable Housing Task Force, led directly to your legislation to begin a housing trust fund for the first time in the city's history. Rev, your work on leading the land bank and your role now in having the chairmanship of the land bank will lead directly to the initiative you've been calling for since the time you began, which is the direct investment into neighborhoods. And I think that when you have that type of diversity that sees things more from a 360 than one-dimensional, other people that are seeing things one-dimensional, it benefits all. Like Lindsay said, or Majestic, I think one of them said, it's when we talk about equity, it doesn't only benefit Black neighborhoods. When we talk about equity, we're not just talking about MWBE contracts or all the other ways that we created measurements in the past to see if the city was acting equitably. We're talking streetlights. We're going into a contract to replace 40,000 streetlights. And before, equity would mean that 15% of the contract work has to go to minority firms and 20% to women, or whatever the numbers would be. Equity this time means we're going back before we replace one damn light bulb, and we're going to see where the streetlights are. And guess what? When you start to look at it, guess where there are streetlights on every single telephone pole? And then guess where there's only a streetlight at the intersection? Low-income neighborhoods. That was a conscious decision over 100 years of consciously deciding where streetlights should go. So when we go back, we don't just do what we did in the past. We correct the problem through the lens of equity before we even begin. That's what every department is charged with. That's what we're working with a national organization to test us, to make sure we're really living up to it. And that's how you begin to be able to not only create a culture change within city government, but an opportunity change throughout the city. When we talk about equity, we talk about the reversal of what had been happening for decades in disinvestment in certain neighborhoods. And we counter it by additional investment in those same neighborhoods.
And, Mr. Mayor, you and I have started talking about this since I first came on council, right? When we started talking about CDBG money and some planning, back when I first came, it was like one of my first initiatives. I've been around long enough now to see a lot of the ideas that we thought, we could never do because we couldn't get the political goodwill of the other council people to do. Now we're in a season now where we're getting both the goodwill of the other members of council, but also the corporate sector and the foundation community all saying, yes, it's time to rebuild Black communities and rebuild them for Black people and to be diverse and middle class, mixed income middle class neighborhoods. I want to ask you a little bit about something that's really timely, that something that we worked on together that was preliminarily approved today on council, and that is about using the COVID relief funds from the federal government in an equitable way. As you know, council passed preliminarily legislation that calls for us to create a task force of council leadership and the mayor and his administration to work on recommending to council the overseeing of the money and using, as we all know, a lot of the money has to go to the fund balance and to the 5-year plan, but we think there may be somewhere between 15% or so of the overall money, maybe somewhere, I use the rough number, $50 million that we'll have some discretion with. And it may be more, maybe less, but that's a good number to kind of think about. And that we can do that in an equitable manner. That is, we have a once in a lifetime opportunity, the greatest investment in Pittsburgh by the federal government of all time. And we may be able to do 2 or 3 things that significantly, transformationally affect Black people. That's a lot of comment and not much of a question, but I want you to talk, and we developed that together. You, Lavelle, and myself as partners, we actually sat in a room and created this process. Let's talk a little bit about what we may be able to see by investing those dollars. What's your thinking, Mr. Mayor?
So first, I just want to throw a little bit of caution that we still don't know what the exact number will be as the Treasury starts to figure out. This is why it's so important to register and to respond to the census. These types of decisions have a direct effect on that. So we'll see what that final number is, but we're in the ballpark of about 350 million, somewhere more than likely a little less than that, but around that area. We have a 2-year process. We have a first year, half of the money coming in. Obviously with that, it's going to be partly pushed towards financial stability in assuring the city's continued financial strength, and then another equal payment coming back in the year after. So we should be looking at plans that will be able to be funded over 3 years, not just one and done, but over the next 3 years. How can we really put it into some of these ideas we've been talking about that will help to grow? The one criteria that I will look at, equity is already decided. That is done. That will be the lens that these decisions will be made through. But the idea is, how can we utilize any of these funds to be able to get additional funding? I've never given up on trying to find a way to bring UPMC, Allegheny Health Network, Highmark, Carnegie Mellon, University of Pittsburgh, our corporate community, our foundation community all together. This will be the way to do it. So what are those critical areas? I look forward to the discussion with you, Councilman Lavelle, Councilwoman Smith, and the greater community in determining what they are. But as you said, we can't sprinkle a little bit over 50 different areas and expect anything to be significantly different. We have to really concentrate on a handful. I would say number one is housing. I would say the first thing that we really need to focus on is creating ways to have more availability, a greater supply of affordable rental and home ownership opportunities in the city of Pittsburgh. Number one, we have too few areas where people with a voucher can rent, which automatically pushes the rent cost up because you have a big demand and no supply. If we can have more opportunity for people to be able to do it, and we tried, as you know, City Council approved a measure that took away disparity in income, meaning that if you had a voucher, if you had a jar full of quarters, or if you had a credit card or a check, you could pay your rent. And as a right of having that business in our city, you had to accept it. And they took us to court over that. That should raise a lot of flags of what it is that they were afraid of about a person being able to pay their rent. So until we win that court case and bring that back, we have to expand affordable housing. Secondly, we need to look in areas that have been left behind in the expansion of the new economy. So we see pockets in the city that are booming, and the market's going to take care of them. They'll be able to put in market rate housing and make a profit. They'll be able to build office space and make a profit. They'll be able to create different types of lab space and everything else and make a profit. But there needs to be a sweetener to make that happen throughout the city. And that sweetener has to be something that concentrates on the neighborhoods and doesn't invest solely in the brick and mortar of the building, but at the people that live there as well. Sort of like the Avenue of Hope on steroids. How do we get people to be able to start their own businesses, to rebuild their own communities and reduce blight? So we have to have a program that we're going to be able to fund to be able to do that, so that we level the playing field and that there's economic opportunity in all of our neighborhoods. And then third, for me at least, and I think, having listened to the conversations, not only this past year, but the past 7 years, we are going to be hard pressed to find enough workers in these next 10 years. There is more development being planned in this area and this region than has ever happened in my 56 years on this planet. And we're either going to be able to find these workers of tomorrow in our neighborhoods, or we're going to have to import them from places like West Virginia, Maryland, and Ohio. So we better plan right now on training and workforce development that is putting people into these positions that already call Pittsburgh home. And we should be able to create guaranteed employment through a training program that at the end of your training, you not only have a job, you have a career. And I think if we can focus in on those types of issues, we can utilize this fund to do things that we have never been able to do, at least since I started working in city government nearly 30 years ago.
Sorry, I was thinking about what you were saying. I recently had a conversation with Rich DeClaudio at the Energy Innovation Center, sort of talking about something very similar to the fact of needing to train approximately 1,000 to 4,000 workers a year to begin filling a lot of the positions. But one of the things we also started talking about was the diversity within those positions. Because part of what I've discovered, and Majestic spoke on this, he may want to tease out a little more yourself, Mr. Mayor, is that a lot of the companies that are coming and some that have not come to our region is because of the lack of diversity and because they can't get the diverse talent that they want working at this, which ultimately really hurts our economy as a scale. And so I guess I'm just sort of reiterating what Majestic said, or he may want to talk about a little more, which is equity is not just about doing right by Black folk. It's by doing right by our entire region, because if we don't, then we won't really continue to grow from a residential pool that will continue to still struggle. So I'm just curious of your thoughts on that.
I'm going to throw it both over to Lindsay and Majestic, because both of them advised me on one of the critical components that we do have a direct ability to change, and that's the quality of life. You're a young, college-educated Black engineer, and you get a job offer from Pittsburgh, but you also have a job offer from Washington, D.C., Cleveland, and Atlanta, and your last choice is Pittsburgh. Why are we getting beat by Cleveland? I can understand the Atlanta or other southern cities, but there's no reason that we shouldn't have such a high quality of life that allows there to be not only an investment in just culture, but amplification of history, preservation of history, pride. And as I think Majestic said to me several years ago, there's only so many times you can go to Savoy. There needs to be options. And it's better than it was in the 80s. It's better than it was in the 90s, thanks to people like Justin Strong. But we need to find the other Justin Strongs. We need to find the entrepreneurs that build out that lifestyle, the third places where people want to go and where people want to be. And until we do that, we will have a deficit in attracting the type of talent that those companies are looking for. And I'll pass it over to both Chief Powell and Chief Lane.
So just to add on briefly to what the mayor is saying and what you said, Councilman, I think this is a really important issue. And I want to start by saying this. About 20, 25 years ago, it was identified that Pittsburgh was losing young people. And there was a lot of conversation about how Pittsburgh was losing young people. And there was an author by the name of a professor by the name of Richard Florida, who was a good friend of the mayor, and really came out and talked about how cities across the country who weren't doing things to keep and maintain young people were going to lose in the new economy. And our region came around together to think about that, to think about the future of what it meant to build places where young people wouldn't have to go to Silicon Valley. Young people wouldn't have to go to Austin. They wouldn't have to go to Chicago, but they could stay in Pittsburgh. We created Pump. We created the Sprout Fund. We created so many structures and institutions that were dedicated to keeping and developing intellectual capital. And we have been successful. And we've been so successful that now we've had neighborhoods explode and bloom because of business development, people meeting and playing kickball and starting families, and all these great things. And companies across the world now see that, and they invest in us. They invest in our city. The crux of the next level of quality of life for Pittsburgh will be, how are we investing in Black people? How are we investing in young people? How are we investing in brown people from the same BIPOC communities in the same way that we thought about that 20 to 25 years ago? Because that was the investment that made us different than Buffalo. No disrespect to, folks from Buffalo. That was the investment that made us different from Cleveland. It made us different from other Rust Belt cities. We have to make that level of investment. And it's a two-pronged investment. One is the investment in the attraction, and that's the attraction for other people to say, hey, I could go to Atlanta and buy a home. I could go to DC and buy a home, or I could go to Pittsburgh and buy a home at 30% lower and still have a higher quality of life and know that I'm important, which is why it's important to say Black lives matter. It's important to say Black people matter. And it's important to say Black neighborhoods matter, because people know when that's happening in a city. So that's one part of attraction, right? And I think there's been more conversation about attraction, but it needs to continue to have that conversation and that quality of life and building out neighborhoods in the city where people of all ethnicities, but specifically Black people, are investing. The second part of it is we have to develop our local talent. We have to develop the people who don't leave. We have to develop the folks who don't go to HBCUs. We have to develop people here and give them pathways and on-ramps to the opportunities in the city to make sure that even if they never leave the city, they can live a quality of life, which was so important for Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh was a place you could come, go to the factory, go somewhere and take care of your family. And so many people were able to benefit, and the city was able to benefit because of that equity that was around for Black and white people. We have to think about that in the same way. And so many things we're doing, we're partnering for work. So many ways we're actually partnering with the Fuse Corps, and I'll let Chief Powell talk about that a little bit. One of the really good, interesting ideas we're working on around that. But we're really trying to say, how do we keep and maintain people, but also develop people who are here and let people know they're important? Equity is not just a moral imperative. Equity is an economic imperative. Cities that are not equitable, we've seen it in the pandemic, they have suffered. When you look at the two cities in America that people really look at, people left, they were New York and San Francisco, because of the cost of living and the lack of opportunity for people. So this is a decision that we have to make this the quality of life, to make anyone feel like they want to be here. And we have to provide the on ramps and the pathways to be able to do that. Whether that's our work with the construction, whether we're partnering for work and around the Builders Guild, whether it's our work with Bankworks, right, which is also another program we're partnering for work, because we have the fifth largest bank in America located here in our city. So how do we create these pathways and on ways for people to be able to get opportunities to work in all the banks who are located here, one if they're centered here or if they have a satellite office. Our financial empowerment centers, which is also around equity, that 70% of the folks who are using our financial empowerment centers are Black, and 50% of them are women. So we are acknowledging that these things about providing the quality of life and these on-ramps that people need are essential to functioning in a 21st century city. So it's for us, it has to happen. It actually is the issue of our time, and it's going to be the issue that determines what kind of city we are. But it doesn't have to be done by separation. It has to be done by creating opportunities for everyone, but focusing on those who have been harmed the most and creating specialized opportunities to do that. So I'll pass it over to Chief Powell.
I mean, I would just add briefly, I think, we share the same philosophy in that the retention of Black people is critical because there's talent here. Again, going back to that idea, how do you move away from a deficit-based thinking? There's talent here in Pittsburgh. There's Black talent here in Pittsburgh. And for a myriad of reasons, folks feel like they've been shut out from opportunities, either because there's been no slow on-ramp, there's been no, soft introduction to what's possible. For a lot of people, success, as Chief Lane, talked about, was seen as moving to Atlanta, moving to DC, moving to New York. To combat some of this, we've worked really closely with the Fuse fellow organization, and particularly with our CTE programs. How can we ensure that young people who are coming out of school, high school, with a physical skill, with the certificates to do that, are able to utilize those certificates and find work right in our backyard? And how do we make sure that any barriers that a young person may have, whether that's not knowing about opportunities here, whether that's ensuring that they have the soft skills, to get into those positions, and even getting solid commitments from organizations and companies within the region to say that we are going to hire local talent, and not just we'll do it, but we're taking our new class will take 15-20% explicitly of young people who have been through these programs. That's a type of commitment that we're looking for to ensure that young people, and particularly Black young people, see that there's an opportunity to be successful here. I think that also even goes even further, with our Learn and Earn program. That's even before you graduate, that young people are able to learn a skill, have a summer internship, and get paid for it. As someone who's taken a lot of internships herself, for someone who isn't able to take an unpaid internship because there are resources for them at home or someone can pay for it. Oftentimes, a lot of companies or a lot of organizations will expect you to take these unpaid positions because you're getting paid with experience, but experience doesn't pay the bills. And so with Learn and Earn, making sure that the young people who engage in this program have a paycheck every week, make sure that you can get some of those more, vulnerable young people, those, again, who may not be able to take an unpaid internship or may opt to take, a job that may not be in their field or of their interest because they're going to get a check out of it. And so again, the attraction of Black talent is critical, but I think the retention and recognition of the talent we have here will also be one of the key steps in making sure that as we move forward, that our Black community in Pittsburgh is supported and sees opportunity here.
At this point, I would like Micah to come on camera. She's been monitoring questions that have been put in the chat that as people are watching. So I'd like to give her an opportunity to ask one or two questions before we have to let the mayor go.
Evening. One of the questions we got was that one of the greatest racial disparities here is health, and how have you worked to improve health outcomes in Black Pittsburgh?
There's a couple of different initiatives that we've been working with. When 10 years ago, people would say, well, health and health services are a part of state government and county government. The health code is enforced by the county and not by the city. The city is responsible for the criminal code and the building code. The county is responsible for the health code. But what we realize is that just like so many other things, the areas where there are low income neighborhoods have the greatest disparity on health outcomes across the board. The largest amount of asthma occurs in our lowest income neighborhoods. The highest rates of complications due to pregnancy happen in our lowest income neighborhoods. The ability to allow and make sure that there aren't poisons in the land happen in our lowest income neighborhoods. And in the city of Pittsburgh, that means Black neighborhoods. So we have to be proactive in order to be able to address all of those issues and not simply wait for the federal government, the county government, or the state to do something about it. When it comes to reducing the amount of lead, we began our lead pipe removal program by starting in our lowest income neighborhoods and then focusing in on households that concentrated where children were living because the negative effects were greater for children. We started to work now to look at how we're going to be able to remediate and lessen the amount of lead paint in a house. Even though it doesn't directly affect the building code, it's still a health issue that affects our residents. And we need to step up and do more in order to be able to remediate that situation and especially keep our children safe. We've been looking and measuring where carbon is the greatest. And as you can imagine, it's along bus routes and along construction areas. And a lot of that is in our low-income neighborhoods. We've worked with People's Natural Gas to monitor all the methane leaks in the city and then prioritize in those neighborhoods where there's lakes of methane to be able to replace those lines first. So I think it goes back into the equation of equity being built at the beginning and not a reaction to the end. And being able to assure that all of our operations that include public health, environmental health, and any other factor which would have a bearing on an individual is being utilized the best it can within the city. When we started in 2014, we did not offer health and wellness as a component of our Parks and Recreation Department. Today, we're providing programs not only for kids, but for seniors in order to be able to help with mental health, physical health, emotional health, and understanding that a tool like that can do so much more than just provide recreation opportunities. And we've made it part of what city government's role is for the 21st century.
Just if I could just quickly add on another thing that I think the mayor has led on around health is last year there was a report done by our Gender Equity Commission as well as the University of Pittsburgh that talked about the just the unacceptable health outcomes, specifically for Black women that occur in our region. And there was a lot of conversation. And, you know, one thing that I'm really proud of is that we took a report that was negative, that talked about what's happening, and then we faced it and really thought about it. And one of the main things we understood was that one of the biggest challenges that health becomes a proxy of is the fact that it takes Black women 22 months to earn what a white man earns in 12 months in our region. And so how do we start to work on that as a stabilization of families and then use that? So we started a process of looking at a guaranteed income program to focus on Black women, the only guaranteed income program in America that will focus on Black women, specifically making under 50% of the area median income, which is essentially, at or around the poverty level. And really saying, how can we provide resources to stabilize families and seeing what happens and what changes with health outcomes when people have access to more resources, acknowledging that it's often not just about, income, but about race. But let's say for people who are most impacted, and the information early coming out of Stockton and coming out of so many other places around guaranteed income is that these things increase health outcomes. These things increase family outcomes. So we're looking at HPGH, which is our guaranteed income program, as really being something central to locating the health of Black women and centering that in the work that we're doing going forward, and figuring out how do we make sure we get resources to the Black community in that way.
Let me just jump in too, because the city received a lot of criticism from the gender equity report, but it was absolutely imperative that we ripped off the Band-Aid. There was still debate in this town whether disparity and systemic racism was real. And that report made it abundantly clear with data that it's real, it's measured, and this is how it's affecting people's lives. One of the key areas of it, and I spoke about this earlier, was the difference between white women and Black women when it comes to childbirth, when it comes to prenatal care, and post pregnancy, and the health rates being completely different. Because of that, well, I shouldn't say because of that report, but due in part to that report, R.K. Mellon Foundation has now teamed up with McGee Women's Hospital Research in order to study directly the programs that need to be implemented to help Black women in Pittsburgh to be able to have a much more equal opportunity to have a safe pregnancy. And looking at all of the contributing factors and providing the research and then the follow-up investment into being able to lessen that disparity. When I talk about that partnership, that happens because we're able to communicate with UPMC, with R.K. Mellon Foundation, with the University of Pittsburgh in providing the information, and then pulling those resources together that go so far beyond the city's budget to be able to actually get results done. And that is a critical part in recognizing what we need to do in these next several years when we see those federal funds coming in to make them so much more.
Excellent. Thank you. I think the next one was, is there a place to learn about the programs available to Black Pittsburghers in working towards your equity goals?
I'm going to throw this one to Lindsay because there's several, but I think that what we would like to do is work with both council members as part of the Black Pittsburgh Matters movement to create, almost like we've done with environment or other areas, a place on the city's website that is specific towards programs to help Black Pittsburgh, and to be able to do everything from childcare to how to get a new roof, and to be able to make it as simple as just clicking on and finding what it is that you need. But Lindsay, where are the best sources presently to be able to find any type of assistance that's available sort of as a one-stop shop?
Absolutely. So anytime, if you're curious about a program that we run, the best place to go is our website. The city's website is incredibly comprehensive, from more information about how to get to our financial empowerment centers, to information about what summer programs are available for young people at our rec centers. It's all there. In addition, the URA's website, and I can leave it all in the chat to make sure that you have it. The URA's website is incredibly comprehensive as well. That's where all of our, I would say, housing programs live, as well as some of our programs around entrepreneurship. So that microloan program that I talked about in the beginning, you can find an application there. If you're looking for rent relief, you can find that there as well. If you're a homeowner looking to get some money to help maybe put a roof on your place that you aren't able to do out of pocket, that application is there as well. So between the city, the URA's website, as well as 311, that's our gateway to the city. If you call 311, You'll get actual person on the phone that'll talk you through whatever you're looking for. So those three places would be absolutely the best ones, and I'll make sure that you have them so that folks at home watching are able to access them.
I'm posting some of them in the chat now. And I think our last question of the evening was, how are you working to ensure that Black youth are afforded the opportunities and support to live in a more equitable Pittsburgh?
I tell this story often, so people probably have heard it a number of times, but it is the best advice I've been given as mayor of Pittsburgh. We started the summer of Earn and Learn back in 2014, and prior to that, we'd hire about 130 kids, and we would put them to work at basically painting fences and cutting grass and with Public Works. And I remember, Reverend Burgess, you brought it up when we were on council together. You know, we should be investing these community development block grant right back to kids. You know, we should be investing in people, not in pavement. And so I took that to heart. And so we had 600 kids that first year. And I'm honored to say that last summer we had over 2,000 during COVID. And this summer, our goal is every kid that wants a job will have a job. Again, you only do that through partnerships. But anyways, there was a group out of Belts Hoover that had been working not only with the neighborhood and with some of the contractors in the neighborhood, but also with Duquesne University and some other programs during the summer. And at the end of their summer, they performed a play. And that play was something that was very touching. And afterwards, I spoke to one young woman, she was 14, named Jordan. And Jordan gave me the best advice I've gotten as mayor. I said to Jordan, so what was the best part about your summer? And I thought I knew exactly what she would say. It was going to be, I got paid, right? She said, I got to go outside. She said, in the summer, my mom doesn't let me outside because it's too dangerous. And this summer, I got to go outside. And then unsolicited, she said to me, you can't make decisions for me. I'll make my own decisions, but you can give me opportunity. And that's exactly what a mayor's job is. It's to be able to use the power of that office to give people opportunity that isn't there before, opportunity that some people may not have thought of, opportunity that people have been asking for. For far too long, this city has been divided between people that have been given every opportunity and those that have had to struggle in order to be able to find opportunity. And I think that if there's anything I can do to the youth in the city of Pittsburgh, especially within our Black neighborhoods, is to guarantee that the opportunity that anyone gets is the same opportunity that they get. And you know what will happen? A lot less crime, because there will be a lot less poverty. And it will change the course of not only city neighborhoods, but the city as well. Jordan started her second year of college this year, and she's working at the Home Depot in East Liberty. Very proud of her.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
We have spent over an hour with you, Mr. Mayor, and I know you have a very tight schedule, so we want to thank you. But I do want to say one thing to you while you're here. Often, especially from younger folk, I get asked about sort of the legislative process and what I'm able to get done, or will I promise to get this done, or will I promise to get that done? And they'll often ask me as the city, like they'll say to me, I need the city to do A. And what I often tell them is none of this gets done by in and of itself. There's no piece of legislation that I can put on the table. The legislation that me and Reverend Burgess have to put on the table has to have an administration that's willing to actually see it through, that's willing to implement it. The economic development that we're working to achieve, the Lower Hill District, like all of that requires a partnership. And I just want to thank you for being a good partner to Black Pittsburgh, for helping us build out our communities, because you can't do it alone and we can't do it alone. It requires us putting all egos to the side and saying, what are the collective things we could do? So I just wanted to thank you for that.
In the words of Lao Tzu, a Chinese philosopher who walked the earth the days before Jesus, he said, when the work of the best leader is done, the people say we did it ourselves. And thank you for putting together the consensus around critical neighborhoods and being able to create priorities that allow us to be able to implement. It's only through that grassroots bottom-up approach that people actually feel that their government is working for them.
Thank you. And with that said, that is all the time we have for today's show. I do need to thank our guests, Mayor William Peduto, his Assistant Chief of Staff, Lindsay Powell, and Chief Equity Officer and Deputy Chief of Staff, Majestic Lane. Thank you all for being here. In order to have a significant investment in the Black community, it is imperative that we make our community safe and peaceful. And we are clearly committed to rebuilding our Black communities in Pittsburgh for Black people, by Black people, with our partners of allies, of which we consider the mayor one.
I want to thank all of you for watching and participating in this town hall meeting. Remember, you can watch this show on Facebook, the city's YouTube channel, or the city's cable channel. A new meeting occurs every Wednesday. By working together, united in purpose, we can transform our city, strengthen it for all of its residents. Pittsburgh is becoming a city for all by becoming a city where Black Pittsburgh matters. Good evening, stay safe, and be blessed.